I'm scientist Dr. Google It, and we're here again with part 2 about the red tide affecting the coast of Florida on the Gulf of Mexico. As you'll be able to tell, the red tide affects not only fish, but it also affects the tourism industry, which is a large part of the economy here on the coast of Florida. Most of the people here that enjoy their vacations in southern Florida have gone elsewhere. The beaches are practically deserted, and this time of the year they would be filled with happy tourists enjoying the beautiful white sand beaches of the Gulf of Mexico. It also affects the local economy, especially local fishermen who cannot go out merely casting their net or fishing right off of the coast because of the red tide. The toxic algae bloom that acts as a neurotoxin in the fish, and for them to then die and suffocate on the beach, is poisonous to humans. So the red tide is extremely toxic to the fish because it affects their central nervous system. The toxins that...
Squirrels.
Did you just jump on my leg? The thing jumped up on my lap. And that's why you see so many dead fish washed up along the shore. But there's much more to the red tide out to sea, and so therefore the local fishermen cannot bring in their normal catch for consumption here in southern Florida. But of course right now there really aren't any tourists to consume the fish. It's especially deadly to any type of shellfish. Humans cannot eat shellfish or really any other fish infected by the red tide. It's quite common to see a resident having their dog out on the beach with them, enjoying the day with their owners. But now you have to watch all of your pet, because you can see how with all of the dead fish that are all over this beach, that just a couple of licks or bites from a dog onto this red tide infected fish could bring that home. So you need to be very careful about watching your animals. So the red tide affects much in the way of any type of enjoyment of life here in southern Florida. One interesting theory exposed by some scientists is that iron dust from the coast of South Africa actually blows in and about by the wind and is rained down upon the Gulf of Mexico, thus causing the red tide to actually expand and worsen its toxic poison. Does cooking or freezing infected fish and shellfish cause any reduction to the toxic level of the red tide? So far, the toxin seems to be unaffected by temperature extremes. So no, you cannot freeze fish for consumption later or cook it at a high enough temperature to make the red tide non-toxic for consumption. What is dinoflagellitis? It is a certain bloom of algae that comes with the red tide. That's what gives the red tide its visible coloration that we mentioned before, that can be seen even from space. Certain fish can accept certain amounts of this toxin because they're able to store it. But during the times when the red tide is prevalent, the toxin is too large for the fish to store them. So again, they have this neurological response where they cannot swim, and therefore you see all of the dead fish that are completely toxic to human consumption. This PST and these toxins have been implicated in various marine animal mortalities involving trophic transfer of the toxin from its algal source up the food chain to higher predators. There's even been a military interest in the use of these toxins. What is the military interest in such a horrible toxin? Many believe that the red tide was weaponized back in the 50s and 60s to provide a sort of natural, undetected way of killing human beings. that these weapons were not necessarily employed, but were certainly developed for use in missiles, bombs, maybe even more covert methods of killing other humans. Remember, this red tide toxin is completely poisonous and deadly to consumption for human beings. Apparently, back in President Nixon's term, such toxins and weaponization of the red tide were forbidden. But as late as 10 years following the Nixon administration, apparently there were such toxins that had been weaponized that were discovered. Hopefully now they're not in use. As you can tell behind me, there's not a lot going on today, and the smell is disgusting. It's really gross. I mean, you can barely stand out here. I've developed a cough in a couple of days of just being out and around this smell. And it's something I've noticed in many of the other tourists that were brave enough to stay here during the red tide.